air was thick with anticipation as the last sliver of sunlight vanished behind the horizon. It was Halloween night, and the small town of Silver Hollow was known for its eerie traditions. Every year, without fail, teenagers would dare one another to enter the abandoned Cartwright Mansion. It was a crumbling Victorian-era house on the edge of town, overrun with vines and cloaked in shadows. No one had lived there for decades. No one except the ghosts, or so the rumors claimed. This year, it was Emily, Jake, Sarah, and Brian who were drawn into the mansion's allure. Emily was the first to suggest it as a joke at first, but now, standing at the rusted iron gate, it didn't feel like a joke anymore.
Are we really doing this?
Sarah asked, her voice shaky, clutching her flashlight so hard her knuckles turned white. Jake rolled his eyes, trying to hide his own nervousness.
Come on, Sarah. It's just an old house. Ghosts aren't real.
Emily glanced at the others and nodded toward the house.
Let's just go in. The sooner we do, the sooner we can leave.
They all exchanged hesitant looks before slowly pushing open the gate. It groaned loudly, the sound echoing into the stillness of the night. The path leading to the front door was overgrown, weeds and vines snaking around their legs as they made their way forward. The front door, like everything else about the mansion, was in disrepair. The wood was warped, peeling away in places, and a large brass knocker hung crookedly. Emily reached out, hesitated for a second, then turned the knob. It creaked open without resistance, as if it had been expecting them. The inside of the house smelled of damp and rot, the air thick with dust. A chandelier hung precariously from the ceiling, its crystals caked with grime. The wallpaper had long since peeled away in most places, revealing dark, moldy spots beneath.
This place is disgusting.
Brian muttered, wrinkling his nose.
Let's just look around and get out of here.
The floorboards creaked beneath their feet as they ventured deeper into the house. The dim light from their flashlights barely cut through the darkness, casting eerie, dancing shadows on the walls. As they entered the living room, Jake's flashlight flickered for a moment, and when it stabilized, the group froze. There, on the far wall, hung a portrait of a family. The figures were faded and ghostly, but the eyes seemed too vivid, too real. They followed the group's every movement.
Creepy.
Jake smirked, trying to lighten the mood.
Probably just a trick of the light.
But as they turned to leave the room, a cold gust of wind blew through the house, slamming the door shut behind them with a deafening bang. Sarah screamed, and they all spun around.
What the hell was that?
Brian exclaimed, running to the door and yanking on the handle. It wouldn't budge.
Is this some kind of joke?
Emily demanded, her eyes narrowing at the others.
No way.
Jake said, his face pale.
I didn't do anything. Let's find another way out.
Brian suggested, his voice tense. They hurried back into the hallway, but something was different. The house seemed to have shifted. The walls felt closer, the air colder, and the shadows seemed to writhe and twist like they were alive. As they made their way toward the kitchen, they passed a large, ornate mirror. For a moment, Emily caught a glimpse of something moving in the reflection, something that wasn't them.
Did you see that?
She whispered, stopping dead in her tracks.
See what?
Jake asked, turning to look into the mirror. Emily stared at the reflection, her heart racing. The four of them stood in the hallway, but there was someone else, an indistinct, shadowy figure standing just behind Jake. It was tall, unnaturally thin, with long, skeletal fingers reaching toward him.
Jake, move!
Emily screamed. Jake jumped out of the way, but the figure was gone. The reflection showed only the four of them now, but Emily knew what she'd seen.
We need to leave, now!
She said, her voice trembling.
I'm with you.
Sarah said, her eyes wide with fear. They rushed through the house, trying every door they passed, but none of them would open. It was as if the mansion had come alive, trapping them inside. The walls seemed to pulse, and the sound of whispers filled the air, indistinct voices, growing louder with every step.
We're going in circles.
Brian muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead.
We've been down this hallway 3 times.
No, we haven't.
Suddenly, there was a loud crash from upstairs. It sounded like something heavy had fallen, or someone had thrown furniture against the wall.
What was that?
Sarah gasped, clutching Jake's arm.
I'm not sticking around to find out.
Jake replied, pulling Sarah along as they hurried toward the stairs. As they ascended the creaky staircase, the temperature dropped even further. Their breath came out in visible puffs, and their skin prickled with cold. At the top of the stairs, they were met with a long hallway lined with doors. All of them were closed, except for one at the very end.
That's probably where the noise came from.
Brian said, pointing toward the open door.
I don't think we should go in there.
Sarah said, her voice shaky.
We have to.
Jake replied, though he didn't sound convinced. As they approached the door, they could hear a soft, rhythmic tapping sound coming from inside. It was slow and deliberate, like someone tapping their fingers on wood. Emily's heart raced, every fiber of her being screaming at her to turn and run, but she couldn't. They had to see what was inside. Jake pushed the door open, and they all peered into the room. It was a bedroom, dusty and old, with a large, four-poster bed in the center. On the bed sat a single figure, an old woman, her hair white and stringy, her back hunched over. She was facing away from them, slowly tapping her long, bony fingers on the bedpost.
Hello?
Emily said, her voice shaking. The woman didn't respond. She just kept tapping.
Ma'am.
Jake called out. Still no response.
Let's get out of here.
But before they could turn to leave, the old woman's head jerked to the side, her neck cracking loudly with the motion. Her face, gaunt and hollow, was now visible to them. Her eyes were wide and glassy, her mouth hanging open in a silent scream. Then, without warning, she rose from the bed with unnatural speed, her limbs contorting and twisting as she stood. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Instead, the room filled with that same rhythmic tapping, louder now, more frantic.
Run!
Brian shouted, bolting out of the room. The others didn't need to be told twice. They fled down the hallway, the tapping growing louder behind them. As they raced down the stairs, they heard the old woman's footsteps, following them, heavy, shuffling, like she was dragging something behind her. They reached the front door and yanked on the handle, but it still wouldn't open.
Come on!
Emily shouted, pulling with all her strength. Just as they were about to give up, the door flew open, and they stumbled out into the cold night air. They didn't stop running until they were far from the mansion, their breath coming in ragged gasps. When they finally stopped, they turned to look back at the house. Stood there, dark and silent, as if nothing had happened. But as they started to walk away, Emily glanced back one last time. And there, standing in the window of the upstairs room, was the old woman. She was watching them, her glassy eyes gleaming in the darkness, her hands slowly tapping against the window pane.